Hello, and welcome to this session of Heart, Soul, Mind, the regular weekly Bible study of St. Paul Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Peter Pettit, teaching pastor at St. Paul, and I welcome you to this session as we continue our study of Glenn Paauw's book, Saving the Bible from Ourselves. We have just 3 weeks left in which we'll be studying the end of Paauw's book, the final 6 chapters. We will be studying them again 2 chapters at a time as we started. And this week we are looking at chapters 10 and 11, what Paauw calls the Otherworldly Bible, and then Grounded in the Earthly Bible. What this really comes to, what Paauw is talking about here, as becomes pretty evident, is where all of creation and human life and this big story that God has been writing is headed. Where is it all going? In theological terms, that's known as eschatology. Eschatos in Greek is the last thing, and the eschaton would be the end of things, although Paauw points out that word never actually occurs in the New Testament. But eschatology is about the end of things, where it's all going. And that's what he's looking at when he talks about the Otherworldly Bible and the Earthly Bible. He grounds it, no pun intended, in the question of what is creation actually? What is this earthly, worldly, physical existence that we know? And he begins by pointing out that the great Greek philosopher Plato in the ancient world framed earthly existence as a kind of prison, a kind of trap in which the eternal soul is caught, and in which that soul prepares for a life that is freed from physical constraints while it awaits the release from this world that comes in death. And if that's the notion that we have about the world and what we're doing here, then we can imagine that where it all is headed is to that great release, to what is the other world beyond this one, the spiritual realm, the ideal realm in Plato's terms, that realm in which all of the limitations and hindrances and sufferings and afflictions of worldly existence are removed and the soul floats free in a blissful kind of eternal existence. That is the image of where creation is all going that took hold with Plato, subsequently in the Hellenistic world, that wider Mediterranean world that was influenced by Greek philosophy for centuries, and ultimately got recovered also with the Renaissance and the recovery of the ancient Greek philosophies. And really, in many ways, shapes a lot of people's understanding about what the world is and where we're all headed. And Paauw does a really nice job, doesn't he, of pointing out the many ways in which we can see that, whether it's at funeral services or whether it's in our common everyday language, and also in the ways in which people think about Christianity, about religion, about the purpose of religion, and ultimately about heaven and hell, that this is a foundational kind of image and notion in our culture. But, says Paauw, it's not the biblical picture. The biblical picture of where this is all going is not into some kind of release or rescue or freedom from worldly existence. Rather, where the biblical story is aimed is at a restoration, a renewal, a recreation of our created existence. Um, and he gives a number of, again, fascinating examples from Scripture, where by allusion or reference, he talks about the way in which, for example, the book of Revelation doesn't talk about those who are in heaven simply sitting and blissfully reflecting on their now idealized existence, but rather asking God, how long will you wait until you reveal things on earth the way we know them here? Similarly, it's not that in the end times in Revelation, everybody goes up to heaven, but rather the new Jerusalem comes down to earth. God is living with God's people. This is built on the imagery of Israel's prophets, for whom the world to come, the Messianic era, the day of the Lord, were all about things that were going to happen in this world at Mount Zion, where God is enthroned, where the Torah goes forth, where all the people stream to it, where there's no more weeping or wailing, no more grief on all God's holy mountain. The Bible paints a picture of where it's all going that is very much present in this world as it is set right, as it is redeemed from the evil that human rebellion has caused within it, as it is made truly the temple of God that God created it to be in the beginning. And so one of the notions that Paauw emphasizes very helpfully is that the biblical idea is not about a here and a there, and one could say down here on earth and up there in heaven, but rather the biblical notion is of a now in a world that is broken and sinful and experiences suffering and pain and harm, and of then when the day of the Lord has happened, when the Messiah returns, when God brings creation to its fulfillment, of then when pain and suffering are removed, when the world is, as it were, in a sense, purified, set right, and can continue on its course with Christ as its Lord, and peace and justice and righteousness characterizing the whole world. And the then, it can already be experienced because of the resurrection. This is what the resurrection says. Now, in this world, Christ is crucified. Then, that death is redeemed in the crucifixion. And the crucifixion is the first fruits or the beginning of what we can anticipate then, when there will be life beyond death, life beyond suffering, life beyond humiliation, life beyond torture, life beyond injustice, life beyond unrighteousness. All of these things will be rectified, set right. Again, the image of the fulfillment is not so much of us going home to a spiritual place, but rather of God coming home to God's temple once it is again fully fit for God's presence to dwell. And so there are all those re-words, R-E words in the Bible that Paauw points out: redemption, reconciliation, renewal, regeneration. It's a restoration of the way that creation was meant to be, not an escape from creation. He talks even about salvation as fundamentally about a return to health and wholeness and freedom, rather than sickness and brokenness and enslavement. So in looking at this grounded Bible, not the otherworldly Bible, but this grounded Bible, and asking what are we to do with it, Paauw suggests that we read the Bible well in order to learn how to live the Bible well. It's the subtitle of his book. And the Bible's big story, in all of its earthly particulars, shows us a pattern. We've learned his big story has the pattern of creation, rebellion, and repair. That creates a pattern that we can see of how the world works, what the perennial temptations are that we suffer and are subject to, and then God's redemptive surprises, the ways in which God over-accepts our bad offers, the ways in which God creatively reincorporates our sinfulness into the big story. And one could suggest then that having seen the big story and recognizing the pattern that's in it, we might then ask how in our times this works out. And it would be, I think, that we observe the world well. How does it work? That we confess and repent both the temptation that we feel and the sin that we commit. And then, as Paauw suggests, that we collaborate, that we become, in Dom Crossan's terms, partners in a collaborative eschatology, that we become part of that story, as Paauw said in his previous chapter, part of the story of getting from now to then. Because, he says, good works will carry over. What we do in the world matters because the world is not going to disappear. And so good works carry over from the now to the then. Perhaps not so much as the basis for our judgment or the basis for God's determining where we end up in that other world, because it's not another world, but rather good works carry over as part of the framework of the world then in which we are promised we can live. And so Paauw talks about this marvelous concept of a holy sensuousness, a holy sensuousness. And he talks on page 154 about all the things in this world, in all its particularity, that become of interest to us. Listen to this. We want to know about weather, digital technology, soil, food, urban planning, physics, literature, politics, music, forestry, factories, wealth creation, management theories, sexual relations, brain chemistry and psychopharmacology, immigration, transportation, fashion, posture, friendship, theater, power plant engineering, how to survive in the woods, the ecology of oceans, accounting, sales and marketing, what babies know, microbrews, social media, cloning, space exploration, human history, the use and abuse of power, and I don't know where this comes from, the difference between Cool Whip and whipped cream. It all becomes significant because this creation for God is significant. A last point about this. Paauw talks about his experience with the buck coming out of the woods and showing him where the path was so he could get down off the mountain when he was not lost, but redirected by a snowstorm. It's a great story at the end of chapter 11. And he says that from that time on, he realized and stopped resisting the idea that the world we live in is an enchanted place. That notion of enchantment is a sort of quaint medieval, early modern idea that things are imbued with a kind of power and liveliness and presence that goes beyond their mere physical appearance. And the modern world, frankly, disenchanted the world for us. The idea that human reason can analyze everything and get at the workings of it. The scientific method that says things are only true if you can actually replicate the results experimentally time after time after time. These things took the enchantment out of the world and made the world a very mechanistic kind of place, cause and effect, impetus and outcome. Everything operates according to physical laws, and there's no enchantment. But we know that there are moments of enchantment in life. We know it in our personal relationships. We know it in the beauty of nature. I can analyze how a rainbow is created physically, but it doesn't begin to approach what the impact of is looking up and seeing a rainbow, or the dewdrop on a rose petal, or a beautiful sunshine rising over the ocean. These are moments of enchantment, and it's what Paauw's talking about, to realize that the world is more, the world as it is, as we know it, not some other world. This world has holiness and enchantment and powers that go beyond human reason within it. Saving the Bible, he suggests, opens our eyes to saving the world. Saving the world. Not just mastering and controlling it. Saving it. Transforming it. Redeeming it for the God who created it. So a couple of questions. These are on the handout. How do you think about the world? Just off the top of your head. When you look at the world, do you fundamentally see something that is good, as God says in chapter 1 of Genesis? Or do you see something that is basically evil, a problem, even a prison for a soul that wants to escape it? This isn't meant to deny that suffering and pain exist. It's not to become Pollyanna and suggest that everything is fine, or that this is the best of all possible worlds. But it is to say that behind this experience that we're having, that is complicated, and it is a roller coaster, and it has its ups and downs, and its ins and outs, and its pains, and its joys, and all of that, behind that, inside that, or perhaps drawing that forward, what is it? Is it fundamentally good, or is it fundamentally evil and something that needs to pass away and be left behind? Paauw says that the homecoming, when creation comes to fulfillment, will be God's homecoming to the redeemed world, not ours to some spiritual home from which we've been exiled. How do you respond to this? Paauw says that good works will carry over into the world to come, the redeemed creation. What does that say about good works in the Christian life? And how do we relate that to Luther's wise caution against salvation by works? And finally, we might ask ourselves, as we look at it, is the world enchanted? Does God's holiness poured into the world still ooze out from it into our lives? I look forward to our conversation. God bless.